I'm Suzanne Murdock, and you're listening to Powering Productivity. Each episode, I explore the energy that connection, expertise, and flexible working can bring to your business.
Welcome, I'm your host, Suzanne Murdock, and today I'm joined by Deborah Lynch. Deborah is an experienced chartered accountant who's partnered with a wide range of CEOs, executives, and solopreneurs with experience in both the practice environment and industry. Having spent over 20 years both as an operations manager and as a financial controller, she's a unique insight into managing the day-to-day operations of small and medium-sized businesses. She's worked in industries including aerospace, waste recycling, construction, precision engineering, and distribution. On top of all of this, she's also an experienced, on top of being an experienced accountant, Debbie is also a qualified project manager and a certified ISO auditor. So it's very well practiced in implementing quality management systems and frameworks, which, although some business owners might find a little daunting, can really increase your productivity and enhance your team's time and energy as commodities, as I know from experience. So Debbie, welcome. How are you?
Good morning, Suzanne. I'm great. Thank you.
Good. Debbie, I'm really looking forward to talking all of this. I know the whole landscape in finance and business has evolved over the last few years with the new digital applications, and how you interact with clients has changed a lot as well. And I'm also interested in chatting about the added value projects that you can bring to businesses. So let's crack on with the questions. Debbie, during your line of work, what sort of businesses do you typically work with?
Typically we work largely with the SME sector. Now that can be a range of different industries. Say it's manufacturing, service, social enterprises, really across the board in terms of SMEs. And typically that's because that's where we find the greatest need. These are the guys, they're growing, they're evolving. In a lot of cases, they're the one-man band, so they have to wear many hats across the board. So look, we step in there more so as a business support partner. So our role is not just to go in and help them with the compliance side of things in terms of their pay-as-you-earn and their VAT, those types of things, but very much to sort of be there side by side with them to help them with all the different challenges that they're meeting. So at the minute, the compliance burden faced by small businesses is huge. They're trying to meet so many different demands. Should it be HR, health and safety, tax, VAT? They've got their GDPR, their data protection policies. There's just so many different demands from a compliance perspective in business that they really do need that ongoing business support.
How do you find time to keep up with all these different compliances within the different industries? It must be constant. Well, it's like a job in itself.
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's, the background with accountancy and everything else, we've always been very much familiar with our CPD. So there is a lot of support for us in terms of advising our clients in the background. So that in itself, yes, it's challenging. And certainly with COVID and all the evolving changes around that has, it's made it more difficult for us in recent months. But in large, that's quite an easy process for us.
And have you found any time's been freed up, so to speak, with all the the digital apps, etc., coming online? Has that given you more time, or has that just thrown another challenge at you?
No, the digital apps, have really, when I first started in practice, it was very much a paper-based exercise. We used to get left with huge big A3 spreadsheets, analysis pads, and literally it was a pencil and paper exercise trying to get a set of accounts out. So that's probably me just showing my age a little bit, but we probably not say too much more about that now, but how we work has changed. It's just unrecognizable. Yeah, the apps and the different things that are available now do make our life a lot easier. It makes access to our clients' information certainly a lot easier. But at times, yeah, it does bring its own challenges, because sometimes the difficulty is that it's not just about having information, it's about having the right sort of information. It's about having it at the right time. And there's also, scenarios where you have too much information from clients. So you end up having to filter through a lot of unnecessary information. And I think clients struggle with that as well now. Historically, I think most people would have been familiar with maybe working with one or two different systems. And generally that would have been focused probably primarily around either a manufacturing or a trading system, and maybe have their accounts package bolted on. Now what we see from clients is they have packages that and platforms that deal with their marketing, they deal with their trading systems, they deal with their emails, their messaging. You know, there are many different platforms that clients are working off, and it's how they sort of manage that information flow so that they don't end up with what we would call communication silos, so that information, the same type of information, tends to be duplicated across multiple systems. So it could be in your marketing system, it could be in your email marketing campaigns, it could be in your trading systems, it's in your accounts packages, it could be in your credit management software. So many different areas where we see the same information always sort of packaged in separate systems. So where we see now is we're sort of come nearly full circle from not having it all to having it in multiple different places, and how we sort of fit that all together and how we communicate between the systems and make sure that we're not duplicating and repeating workflows. So
yeah, no, it's interesting you say that. I was talking to someone a few months ago, and I remember her saying, you know, people struggle thinking that they don't have the information at their fingertips, and more often they do. They just don't know where they've put it and what to do with it. So it's that whole deciphering it and using what you actually have. But I think the whole ethos of the digital age now is everything is so much more transparent and accessible if you know where to find it, down to you as the accountant. So people, do you find that people, you know, click their fingers and expect to see you on Zoom when in their time, or is it still very much book an appointment?
I think that's a challenge that most business owners and most people face now. You know, people are a lot less they're not a lot less tolerant about sort of managing and separating their time and waiting for information. So yes, it's a challenge that I think everybody has to meet now. But again, you know, there are many tools out there, and we tend to set aside focus time each day. And I think, you know, the expectations are different because the information is there, it's more readily available. So from an accounts perspective, what we tend to find is that because the information and certainly the day-to-day number crunching is that process is largely automated in our practice. So a lot of that information comes in quite quickly, and our customers and our clients, they expect us to be able to flip that a lot quicker. And sometimes that's quite an easy process, but at times it has its own challenges as well.
But it's much easier to pull reports if someone needs them now, I guess, as well. Oh, interesting.
Yes. We are all very much working towards real-time information. As we know, HMRC are well down their path now on the MTD, making tax digital. So we've seen massive changes from that perspective for clients as well. And it is a big challenge for them. People wouldn't necessarily have been as familiar over the last few years with getting information into their software packages and having to report to HMRC in specific ways. And that now, I say, that's rolling out in the next year or two. So we'll be looking at MTD for income tax. So where historically self-employed business would have been familiar with filling in their income tax return at the end of a tax year, you know, and they would have had that period beyond the end of their accounting period where they have an opportunity to do tax planning work. And as they introduce the income tax for the MTD, that's very much going to change. So what it's going to mean is that clients will be reporting to HMRC via their accounting software on a quarterly basis. So that's a big change, you know, even from a lot of our smaller clients who would have been familiar still with, yes, there's an element of the work and they keep the basics up to date sort of throughout the year. And we're very much work hand in hand with them in doing that. Now, what we're saying with the MTD is that they're going to have to be very much on the ball.
And will that impact, sorry, Debbie, interrupted, will that impact from a cash flow perspective? Are they going to have to make the payments quarterly, or does the payment side still stay the same?
the payments side will stay the same, but what will happen is that HMRC will use the income and expenditure reports coming from their accounting software to estimate the tax liability. And I guess from their perspective, it's an improvement for self-employed business because it gives them that ability to see that the tax bill that's coming down the line. But if you look at it from a customer or from a client perspective, they would have been familiar with maybe a few months after the year end, they would have seen maybe their accounts and their tax bill, and they would have had a period to really sort of think about what tax planning opportunities they may have had. Now that's really tightening up, so they'll be reporting to HMRC much more frequently. So there really will be a big step up from that perspective.
More time for you then. So in terms of trends over the last couple of years, what are the biggest reasons for your clients to ask for your advice, and what have you seen the biggest impacts being?
Well, I mean, I think for over the last number of years, we've seen a massive growth in the SME, you know, and their needs have changed very much as things have become more technically based, and all the different software and platforms have all been coming on. I think a lot of the challenges in terms of the systems and platforms, very much about understanding where their information, where they collect their information, how it's stored, and how they extract that information on a timely basis. We know certainly over the last 12, 18 months, the challenges that business have faced in terms of the COVID situation. We have had massive challenges in terms of Brexit, the Northern Ireland Protocol. Customers are now getting to grips again with customs paperwork. And that's been a massive change. And all of these things were coming together. Plus we had our MTD for VAT. That was all rolling out. Well, that has been rolling out over the last couple of years, but you know, there was still a large chunk of clients in there that were sort of getting to grips with that and how they manage that and how they feed that information into their systems. And certainly things like the digital links between their manual paperwork and what was being reported to HMRC and the software. So big challenges, big changes there. But in terms of the business perspective, over the last 18 months, COVID has been a massive challenge in the SME industry. Very much in terms of managing their finances, understanding the legislation, doing the grant applications, and basically really focusing on the short-term cash flow needs. Now we're sort of seeing that the businesses are starting to look forward a little bit again. And I think from our perspective in the practice, what we're starting to see is that there is that element of confidence still out there with the SME sector, but they really need this opportunity now. They need to get some clarity and they need to get some stability so they can really start to look forward and plan forward, not just in a short-term need, but into sort of medium term with their growth plans, with what funding supports out there to really help them rebuild and move forward again. So yeah, it's been very, very difficult time for most.
Oh no, I know, I completely get that as a small business owner, but I think it must be really, really hard for people that haven't got someone like yourself to help with those services from the, you know, updating on compliance, because if you're doing it and going all alone, you don't know what you don't know, and time-wise, it's impossible, you know. And people are being optimistic now, but they need time to gather their thoughts and breathe, and there's no let-up time at all. As you've got your, before you know it, your competition's right there next to you, waiting to come in. If you don't just keep going. And I think from a personal perspective, and our members have said the same thing, there's just no time to take a break, and you really need to be careful you don't burn out.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, like at the end of the day, we're business owners too in the practice. So, you know, we understand. And I think probably with my background, having come from industry and having worked in operations and understanding, you know, you can see how difficult it is, even on a day-to-day on a normal basis before all these new challenges came on board, you know, how difficult it is for a small business owner to wear all those hats. And I say the compliance is just getting increasingly harder all the time. So I think from our perspective as a practice, really what we try to do is we really try to step in and support them in terms of the background, their basic processes, and how we try to make just the day-to-day stuff a lot easier so that they can sort of have that breathing space. you know, because it's quite difficult if they're dealing operationally in managing their VAT, their pay as you earn, their bookkeeping, their accounts, their invoicing, their credit management, and then they're
tiring
looking
me
at
out just talking about it.
yeah, I mean, it really is very difficult. You know, from what it was 10 years ago, businesses really do have to, and GDPR has been another massive challenge in terms of businesses really looking, and I think they still have a ways to go on some of that. I think generally what we find now, how things have progressed with data privacy and protection and the GDPR from the SME perspective, what we're finding is, yes, they've got to grips with the basic compliance needs there. They understand how to collect their customers' data, how to store it, how to protect it. But what we don't see, and where we tend to see gaps in these sort of things, and we sort of step in and advise clients, is how you manage the housekeeping behind that process. So it's all great on upfront when they're collecting the information, and it's good to a certain extent in how they protect and manage and make sure that that information is secure. Where we see things tend to fall down is on the back end. So what happens when a customer leaves? How do you manage that process on an ongoing basis to make sure that you're still compliant with GDPR in terms of making sure you're not keeping customers' data any longer than is necessary, and that you've split that information down so that you know exactly where your needs are in terms of keeping specific pieces of information for compliance report purposes, as opposed to just generally what you tend to see is that they keep a whole block of information. So it's really the housekeeping side of things, I guess, that we tend to focus with now, and we're seeing that come across with clients.
Yeah, no, interesting. So that brings me on to my next question. And what grabbed you about the added value projects that you would do a lot of work with now, so the ISO quality management frameworks, for example?
Well, I suppose traditionally, because I've worked in industry, I've come from a company accountant, and you've been working with SMEs, you do tend to find that those roles have always included an element of systems control and development, and certainly elements of the IT side of things as well. So we would have always been responsible for making sure, obviously, because information quite largely feeds into the accounting system, that you were involved in the front end of that process, and how that information comes from a raw source and is fed into accounting systems. So there's always been that element of that work. But I guess it's probably just because you see the need, and you see where the gaps are when you're working with a client or a customer, or you're an employee or an accountant working in a business. You see that all the time, the sort of where the gaps are and how information and processes, how they flow. So yeah, that's sort of how I got into it.
What would you see, Debbie, sorry, what would you say were the key benefits to a business as a result of implementing something like that?
So what I sort of tend to say to clients, because I think sometimes people tend to get sort of hooked up on the actual certification side of things. So what we sort of try to explain to clients is it's very much, it's about the process, it's about the journey, it's how you get there. So simply by just sitting down and documenting and looking about what your core processes are within the business. And that changes quite a lot from business to business. You know, you may have your basic sales, your purchasing, your manufacturing, and that changes quite significantly between manufacturing type businesses and service industries. I say, like, you would be familiar, Suzanne, the onboarding process, probably for a service industry would be significantly heavier burden than it would be for a manufacturing business. So very much it's about sort of sitting down with clients and helping them focus their attention on how they get what is a prospect into a business and how they turn that into a live sale, and then how you manage that customer journey right through to completion and the end of life cycle. And what we find with customers is, say, look, the biggest benefit they see is simply by just sitting down and looking at those in detail and writing them down, is that they see, well, first of all, usually what they find is they find the gaps, they find the weaknesses, and where things tend to fall over in the system. So it's very much about sort of helping clients strengthening their internal processes and making sure then on the back of that they've got their KPI reporting, and that it all ties into a cohesive framework for businesses to work within. So the certification is wonderful and it's really nice for businesses to have it, but it really, the process is about getting that in place and then working with the tools and techniques that come with the quality management system so that it gives businesses that framework to move forward, so that they're working towards that continual improvement all the time. So it has the tools that sort of, they tell you when things are right, they tell you how to standardize the processes. And if you look from a small business perspective, one of the key things that happens all the time is that the business owners get tied up in the day-to-day operational side of things. So they're involved in the sales processes, they're involved very much. Whereas simply by standardizing those processes, it gives them the confidence to step away from it. They don't need to be standing in there all the time looking over it. It's documented. The quality management systems there is very much this, the tools are there to tell business owners if things fall over and what to do and how they look at that. If things do go wrong, what do they need to do to correct that process so that they can step away from it again? And I think that's a very valuable tool for business.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, having gone through it ourselves, that's definitely a valuable tool. But I think one of the really positive things is it also highlights how much information you have and ways that you can improve your business, customer feedback. So you've got that continuous loop as well. And it's two-way, it's very transparent as well. So you've got two-way information. You're always getting the feedback from your clients. They feel open to talking to you. They know it's going to be put into action or implemented. And they feel a lot more valued. And you know that they've got what they need at the end of it. But personally, it's freed up so much time. I feel a lot more comfortable that things are getting done and they're being done correctly. And it's making me a lot more productive. And I, like you just said, I can use my time elsewhere for marketing, developing the business in other areas.
Yeah, I mean, there are many, many benefits, you know, across the board to the quality management system. You know, I say, you know, it really is to be able to step away from that day-to-day operational. Once it's set down, the documents, the templates, they're all there. It does make it much easier to have that confidence to know that you can step away from that process on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
And you know, I think what we tend to find is that a lot of clients, when they first look at the ISO, they tend to look at it, it's a stick to beat them with. I think
that was my next point. Oh God, it's just a headache. What do I want to do that for?
Yeah. You know, I think people hear the word audit, and I think as soon as people hear the word audit, it automatically conjures up this panic that, you know, people are checking in, and that's not really what a quality management system or ISO is about. It really is about giving business owners those tools and techniques and that framework, you know, to work within that really helps to focus simply by doing things like putting, you know, your quality policy statement in place. You know, what is it? What does this business want to do from a quality perspective? You know, what are their goals? And then that is very much, that's filtered down into quality objectives. And from that, then we start to build the KPI reports behind that. So it very much gives the business that measuring behind the overall objectives. It's not an airy-fairy mission statement that we're not going to revisit. It really does help them to drill down into the detail of that and say, look, okay, we've set these objectives and this is where we want to be within 6 to 12 months or maybe medium term. But simply by doing that and putting the reporting in place, you know, it's a very focused activity. You're not doing KPI reporting for the sake of having all these lovely dashboards and metrics at the end of the month. They really very much, they serve a purpose, and it ties in very nicely with that. And I think the other thing,
they're not all by themselves. You can handhold them through the whole process.
Yeah, very much. You know, there is a volume of work, and to say, you know, it does very, very much the time frame that it can take to take a business from the start of the journey right through to the certification. It can vary tremendously, and it depends on where the business is at itself in terms of understanding where its key processes, what they are, how they operate on a day-to-day basis, and how the information feeds into that in terms of the documents, the templates, and where the information is coming from, what source of that data is in the first place. So it can very much be a very quick process. Say, for instance, when we first sat down to work with yourselves at the hub, you had a lot of that information already at hand. You had a really good grip on where you were operationally and what your key processes were. And a lot of that was already documented. So for someone like ourselves coming in to sort of pull that together, it was really very much about just pulling that into a framework for you and giving you that sort of rounded, finished product, the actual management system with the added reporting. Whereas some businesses we may go in and look at, they may not have any of that in place at all. And that can be quite an eye-opener for businesses as well, because, until you really sat down and looked at those processes, it's very difficult to see where the redundancies and the inefficiencies in the systems are. So it is very much, it's not just about the quality management system, it's about the business process management and that whole wider picture on how a business manages and performs and operates on a day-to-day basis, and how to create the efficiencies within those processes so that it does free up time and it does make everything overall much more efficient, and it can help shorten cash life cycles as well for a business. So
yeah, absolutely. Debbie, what are some of the other projects that you can help your clients with, added value areas that you do?
Well, obviously we do the basic compliance work for clients, so the pay-as-you-earn and the VAT. So that's very much the practice side of things. Typically where we tend to get involved with clients and project type work would be things like systems implementation. So for instance, we've gone out into manufacturing firms and we've helped them to work towards the plan and implementation of a software system. And that's usually quite a big one for clients, because coming from industry, what I tend to see quite often is that businesses buy these packages off the shelf. And people tend to think it's a plug and play. You literally, buy the package, you drop it in, and everything all works from day one, and it's all quite. I think a lot of us understand that the reality is completely different, and as they say, fail to plan and plan to fail. It's very much about getting in with the businesses before they commit to spending that money on a software package. I've seen clients spend hundreds of thousands on bespoke systems, and what they end up with is something that doesn't work. It's got a lot of redundancies. It's got massive amount of volume of data coming out that really is of no benefit and of no use and no need to the business. So initially it's about sort of sitting down and looking at them and sort of understanding, what information does this business need? Where does it come from? How do you get it into the system? And how do you make sure that the information that comes out the far side is what is accurate, and it's coming out on a timely basis as well? So we spend a lot of time. We can spend anything from a couple of weeks, depending on the nature of the system that's going in, to really sort of getting down nitty gritty, across all the sort of core departments of the business, and understanding how all that information fits in from all these different areas, in terms of making sure that the system that they decide to work with is one that's really going to work with them, and it has the ability to grow with them as well over the medium and long term.
Mm-hmm. And I guess from the business owner's perspective, if you're already working with them from the accounting side of things, that's a natural fit, because you know how that business works. And the nuts and bolts that need to go into it.
Yeah, and I think that's been one of the beauties, really, in terms of how things have developed over the last number of years. So the actual bookkeeping side of things, the day-to-day information that's coming into us and going into the accounting packages, a lot of that's automated. So it really does give us that opportunity to get involved on the value-added work with clients, because we can see in a much more live basis, what is going on in this business, are they growing, do they need cash flow injections? A lot of small businesses going through growth periods really struggle with understanding what their cash flow needs are through a period of growth. And the fact that we're working with them and we're seeing that information much more frequently means that we're in a position to sort of step in and help much quicker. It's not that we're looking at a set of historical data, maybe 6 months old, 9 months old, and quite often that's just too late to help the small business. You really need to be in there up front and sort of holding hands with them very much.
Yeah, anticipating the changes needed. Here's a question. If you've a business owner who generally does everything themselves, almost frightened to hand anything over to delegate, where would you say they should start? What tips would you give?
I think that's every small business owner has that initial step.
It's their baby at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very much. And I think the beauty of that is once you start to look at your core process and you start to document that, it becomes much more easier to identify the areas where you go, okay, well, look, we've written that down, so there is a step-by-step procedure on how this is done. It's a standard way of doing it. The forms, the documents, the templates are all there. So it's very easy then for them to have that little bit more confidence because they know it's written down. Yeah. They can see they've got the results, they're measurable, there are reporting behind it, whereas without that, there's always that niggling doubt. Any small business owner will tell you exactly the same. It is very difficult to step away from that. But I think when you have it in front of you in a framework, it's much easier to be able to step back that little bit. And it's very important to say, too many hats, not enough hours. So
and you can only really do what you're good at. You can only know so much. You don't know what you don't know. And I think it's about doing what you're good at, and if you can outsource or delegate the rest to experts where you can.
It's great. Outsourcing has really taken off, and you can understand it's just simply not possible to manage all the different specialties that across the board. From my perspective, marketing is one of my bugbears and one that I avoid at all costs. So every business owner has those areas where they don't have, it's just not possible to know it all and manage it all.
Yeah. So Debbie, what, from a personal perspective, what makes you productive? What grounds you and gives you that energy?
Oh, I think my clients ground, they are very much the driving force behind sort of where we are, what we're doing. And it's great. It's great to get involved. And I think that's a big thing for me, is really getting involved with the clients. It's not about sitting in an office and looking at their information and their systems and their accounts and going, it's great, we're all doing very well. It's really nice to step in and really help them with all the information and their needs in the background and just offering that general support.
That's good to hear. So where can people find out more about you?
Best thing to do is to hop onto Zoom and have a quick chat with me. I'm always glad to hear from you clients and sit down and have an informal conversation with people and understand, like, where are you at? Where are you looking to get to? What are the challenges you're facing? And we can sit down very much then sort of tailor what we can do for customers in terms of offering a support package, as well as just sort of stepping in and helping with their compliance needs.
Brilliant. Well, we'll put all the links to your websites on the podcast. Debbie, thanks very much for your time and best of luck for all your new future projects.
Thank you, Suzanne. As always, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. You can find more information in the show notes or on our website, thehubnewry.com. While you're there, why not join our mailing list so we can keep you in the know about everything we're up to? And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen so you don't miss an episode. Powering Productivity is presented by me, Suzanne Murdock. It's produced by Emily Crosby Media.